Awesome. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
So thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here to learn more about your program as well. Um, so my name is Fletcher Bach, and I'm joining you from Vermont in the USA. It's in the northeast of the US. If you haven't heard of it, it's kind of like just below Montreal, like 2 hours south of Montreal. Um, and I'm super psyched to be here today to share a bit about myself and about the work that I've been creating over the last few years. So I'm an artist, designer, an engineer, an educator. And for the last 10 years, I've been making objects and experiences and exhibits and interactive installations for myself and for other artists and for companies, corporations, that kind of thing. And in that work, I use computation as both hardware and software as key material in my creative practice. And then alongside that work for the last 5 years at least, I've been teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island in the US, teaching in the digital media master's program and the computation technology and culture undergraduate program. There I teach courses on interactive hardware, creative coding, and studio practice, project development, and serve as thesis advisor on graduate thesis committees. Here, there's me. So in my work, I'm looking for ways to show that the computer program or the circuit I've designed doesn't start and stop where the object does, right? It's rather an extension of society, of modes of production, of history, even geology. My work is experimental. It's often research-based, always transdisciplinary. It tries to place computation and art in wider societal contexts, extending the computer system and the network it's connected to social and infrastructural, even political systems. By that I mean like the laptop is that's connecting us today isn't just a laptop, right? It like exists inside these wider contexts, this like constellation of social and even geologic layers. Like Zoom, right, is inside an operating system, which is inside the computer, which is inside a global network, that's the internet, just inside this dynamic of natural resource extraction of lithium and copper, with ecological benefits and detriments, right, that are spread sort of unequally across society. So those things are all happening right now, right? It's not just us talking. Like those things have happened to make this possible, and those things are happening to facilitate this. But some of those things, right, are I think are important, and some of those things I think are interesting and exciting and fascinating. So while going through my past and current projects, I thought it'd be useful to share how these fit into my sort of career framework that I've been building over the last few years. Like as students in media art and design, you're sometimes faced with a kind of opaque career path, or that there's sort of lots of different options, and it's hard. There's not like some obvious career direction leaving school. And this is not like what I'm going to present to you today is definitely not the clearest career direction. I'm not saying everyone should go out and do what I'm doing, but hopefully it offers at least one example of one of the things you can do uh, after school. Maybe this is the least straightforward of the career paths. And in this career path that I've sort of created, this life way, I think of as having these kind of three pillars for myself, these three pillars of my practice, or maybe the three legs of a stool, a wobbly stool. And these pillars are design and engineering client work. And these clients are like, corporate clients, companies, but also artists or museums, cultural institutions, my personal art practice, and education or teaching. So at any one time, right, I'm doing all three of these. Sometimes two, or sometimes one. Sometimes one takes control, and I spend all my time if there's a really tight deadline or something for the client work. There's a show coming up, then I stay up all night working on that, and I don't get to do my personal art practice, right? So I'm always searching for the sort of balance between all three of these things. Each pillar, right, feeds me in a different way. The personal art practice for me is this thing that feels the most like it's for me. rather than for others. It's a space where I get to play and experiment with my own ideas. The teaching is a space for me to formalize and structure some of my ideas and other people's ideas. And teaching provides a community, and it's where I get inspired by dialogue with students and colleagues. It's a sort of a unique space where you can ask big questions, right? Big, like hard to answer questions, less straightforward questions. Whereas client work is a space where I don't usually get to ask those big questions. It's just sort of a straight ahead tasked with implementing a design. I guess I should say, usually with client work, I'm usually in an engineering role. I do interaction design for work sometimes, but generally I'm doing circuit design or writing software. So my role in client work tends toward the implementation rather than the design. Okay. So the projects I'll go through today are going to kind of fit into at least one of all these categories. Some of them might actually cross the boundary between two. But I wanted to start with this question first, which is like, why computers? Because for me, this is at the core of all the things I do, whether they're in the teaching category, the client work category, or the personal art practice category. And I've kind of come back to this question over the years, over and over again, because I'm kind of critical, right? I'm interested in making in all forms. I'm not only interested in making with computers. You know, sometimes the best way to make a beautiful object is with your hands. Sometimes the best way to make a book is to print it with wood blocks. It's not always to make some sort of interactive website. There's all different kinds of publishing, and sometimes some are better than others. So I'm open to all that, but I often ask myself this question: why computers? And my answer to this, I have a bunch of answers depending on when you ask me. But my answer to this is this: it's sort of there are these amazing translation machines. They're these machines that kind of convert energy. They do transduction, right? They convert energy from one form to another. They turn your keystroke into a blinking light, or maybe hopefully something more interesting than that, or a sound. And one way of thinking about this sort of magic that I see in computers, this magical potential in computers, is like, if I asked you to associate your position in the room with a color, right? It would be very difficult for you to do that. There's nothing inherently relative about your place in the room and the color of, say, the ambient light in the room. Those things are like completely different, apples and oranges, right? It's difficult to compare those things. They're not comparable. Even in computer, there's not a single right answer, but the computer allows us to do something really, really amazing. It does this thing where it kind of translates or flattens those things, both of those things, into the same number space, right? So like my position in a room might be at XYZ coordinate through a sensor. We'd have to use some sort of sensor to sense my position in space into 3 numbers. And those numbers we could put into, say, a processing program or a JavaScript program. And color is also 3 numbers: red, green, and blue. Generally in computers, you have 3 channels of color. So all of a sudden we have color, which is a number or 3 numbers, and my position in space, which is a color, or which is a number or 3 numbers. All of a sudden we can start to map those things onto each other. It's very, very easy, trivial even, to associate my position in space with the color of the ambient light. And there are way more interactions that are more interesting than that, right? That's not maybe the coolest thing you can do, but I think it demonstrates this power that computers have to like speak all these different languages and communicate between all these different forms of matter and action and interaction. There's these wonderful translation machines. So maybe you'll see some of that in my work. Maybe you won't. Hopefully you will. Any questions before we get started and jumping into the projects?
No, I think it's good. Yeah. We just it's great that you talk about how it's hard to have a clear career path in mind when we are in media and interaction design, because that's what we've been talking about with the second years, trying to map out the landscape. And so it's I think it's good to also hear other people saying that. I think we all feel the same way in this field. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I just gave them a speech yesterday about transduction as sort of like a fundamental
wonderful
first step in like a process of thinking about computers. So it speaks to me.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Wonderful. Okay. And feel free to jump in if need be. And then, of course, we'll have question and answers at the end, but happy to pause. This is relatively informal. Okay, so I'll start, and these projects are kind of old, so this is chronological, and like going through these, like putting this together for today as a slideshow, I kind of started to realize how these projects have aged quite a bit. So I'll try to provide some historical context depending on how old you are, the people in the room, right? You might not be quite as familiar with some of these moments. A lot of things have changed in the world for better and for worse that kind of affect the social landscape that these arose in. So this project is from 2015, and I'll talk to you about it a little bit. This was my graduate thesis project at a program called ITP at NYU, which is where I did my graduate work. I don't know if anyone's heard of the program, but it's a wonderful place, a lot of really amazing faculty and students, and a place that really inspired me and it's kind of set me on my path. And while at ITP, I was really interested in glitch, and I still am. It's still sort of a concept glitch, as a concept that really inspires a lot of how I think about computers, in particular computers in art and design. In that it's this sort of creative, critical misuse of computers, right? Like there's all sorts of intended uses. It's pretty general tool, the computer, but it still has these prescribed uses, and all the systems, all the kind of tiny little systems and protocols, programming languages, operating systems. All of these systems have intended uses and sort of capabilities and limitations. And glitch kind of invites us to manipulate those, to break them, to misuse them, to appropriate these interaction technologies and use them for their sort of unintended uses. And so hopefully people have heard of like Rosa Menkman. I also would call on Sonia Sheridan. She's also a really amazing early glitch artist who used copy machines, misused copy machines. So I'm deeply inspired by Rosa Menkman and Sonia Sheridan and others that sort of show us that technology, especially these black box technologies, can be prodded and poked to reveal some of their inner workings, their desires, even their design imperatives, their assumptions, their intents. Sort of the objects that we design bear some of that intent, that design intent of our design intent, and also the design intent of everyone who made everything that came before. So like the missile guidance systems, right, that computers were first used for. We're using the same hardware in many ways. We're using more advanced hardware, but our cell phones and our smartwatches are sort of come from this lineage of sort of military use cases. It doesn't mean that your watch is inherently a weapon, but it does still bear some of those intentions and worldviews. So this is my thesis project, and it was about obfuscation. And I don't know if people have encountered this term before. This term means to sort of to hide or to cover up. So I made a series of browser extensions that were responding to a kind of cultural moment in 2015, so now a long time ago. And this moment was right after the then recent Edward Snowden revelations. And these revelations sort of showed us, in the US at least, that the CIA and companies collected all of our communications and monitored these communications and stored them and collated them and sort of computed on the data that was getting collected. And this was data generated by our everyday behavior. It's also this moment where we had this unprecedented use of computers in our everyday life, where sort of more and more of our lives was on the computer or on our cell phones. We were carrying an internet connected device in our pockets, which we still do, right? But that was a moment where it felt like we were kind of realizing that for the first time, that actually we were always on the internet. It wasn't just somewhere where you went and sat in your house and accessed the internet. We were kind of always on the internet at all times. So this data was generated by our everyday behavior, was also used by advertisers to sort of more aggressively profit off of our participation in society. so that includes our sort of internet behavior, but also like when you go to a bank or a hospital or shop at a store, all of that's like kind of collated together to make this picture of you, the user. So I set out to experiment on how we exist, or sort of explore how we exist on the internet, how we're measured and read and computed upon, and well, what's done with this information, who gets to read and who gets read. You know, how does that sort of spread across different sectors of society? How does that make us feel? And then sort of this question of, do we have this right to be unreadable or inscrutable or illegible? And if we have a right to do that, what tools might we have at our disposal? Here's some headlines too from this moment where we were uncomfortable. I think right now we've kind of normalized and we're kind of comfortable with it, or many people don't care. But this was a moment where that was less common, where everyone was sort of feeling like surprised and maybe swindled by the tools that we were using. We felt like we were sort of being experimented on. And these were sort of real social problems that existed before these tools, right? These existed before the internet, like this bottommost headline here, that women are shown fewer online ads for high-paying jobs, studies show. So like, it's not like the Facebook invented the disparity between men and women in the US in terms of their income, but it certainly perpetuated those. You know, there's this moment where we have these things are encoded, like someone wrote some code that does this. It takes this social problem and perpetuates that social problem. We could rewrite that code. So I was interested in sort of pushing back against these things. I felt this was a kind of violence, and I was curious if there was a way for us to sort of reject this reading of the user. So I made these 3 browser extensions, and these are Chrome extensions that I don't know if they still work. I should try. I know Spreebase still works. But they sort of accessed specific aspects of our identity that the computer can know, or tries to know. It can be wrong, right? But it tries to know. It tries to know our gender, the language we speak, our shopping habits. I also looked into some facial geometry stuff, which we'll look at. And I made these 3 browser extensions to kind of respond to and obfuscate these aspects of my identity and other people's identities. So Genderbender is a browser extension where I basically made a little slider where you can slide back and forth between masculine and feminine whenever you choose. And it uses heavily gendered keywords. So they're not I don't believe these words are inherently heavily gendered, but advertisers do. Words like engineering are heavily male or masculine, considered by advertisers to be very male words, and words like makeup are heavily feminine words. So those kinds of words, keywords, if you're searching for anything like that in your shopping or anything, or Google searches, those words are used to guess at high accuracy what your gender presentation is. And so Genderbender uses keywords like that, as well as Google Chrome had an ad preferences tab. They'll sort of deep in the inner workings of Chrome, you could check what kind of gender you were. So it sort of surfaces that to the user along with this slider for keywords, and tries to obfuscate it so you can sort of you can gender bend online. Spreebase is a really simple one. It's just a browser extension where you can where it randomly shops eBay and Amazon like all the time, every few seconds, just for random keyword from a word list. So as a program, it's quite simple, but it's a very powerful result in that, like, the ads that you see all over your browser and your web experience are words from that list, as opposed to words that you might have actually gone and searched. And then crosstalk targets language, and it surfaces the Google preferences for language, and it searches Google search in the language of your choice. So you can basically choose language or random, and then it searches Google in that language. So the goal here with all of these was to sort of confound data collection apparatus, right? It was sort of feed erroneous data into the system. And instead of not using those, because there's another approach, right? The other approach is not using the internet. If this bothers you, right? You could just not use the internet. But you give up so much, right? In today's world, like you need to use the internet to bank and to access healthcare and health services. And so there's not much of an option there in terms of like choosing to participate or not. You're sort of required to participate. So these feed erroneous data into data collection apparatus, sort of as an experiment. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this was another extension I didn't end up making, but it was a direction of research where you can download. They stopped doing this very recently, but you can download your face recognition data from Facebook, and these were my numbers. So these were my facial geometry numbers. I'm not sure how they work. I read lots of the research papers, but none of them clarified what these mean. So someone may know, but these numbers here represent my facial geometry. And part of my research, I tagged, here's this image that we saw is 75 images of myself tagged Fletcher Bac on Facebook, all averaged. This is just part of my research. But one thing I did do is I tagged 200, and this is back in like 2015, I tagged like 200 pictures of myself as Jeff Goldblum, like on Facebook, just as a test. And then I hid those from the public, so people couldn't see that if they went to my Facebook page, but they were tagged, like they were still there in Facebook, tagged as me. And I didn't see any result. Like my facial geometry didn't seem to immediately change or anything like that. I wasn't able to sort of confuse Facebook as far as I could tell. But 6 years later, in 2021, someone posted this meme on Facebook, and it asked me if I was in the photo. So this was like a fun, result of that research 6 years later. So I don't know what it means, right? I just know that I confused it the tiniest bit. So these are my numbers. They did change, right? I'm not sure if they just got more accurate or less accurate because of the research I was doing. All right. This is a project. I'm just looking at the time here. I'm probably not gonna go over every project that I listed here in the interest of time and allowing time for questions and stuff. But this is a project that I think is a really good example. So I will talk about this one. This one is also old. This one is from about 2015, and came out of this moment where I discovered that private prisons, which in the US there are lots of, which maybe is different from Switzerland and other parts of the world. But I sort of discovered that since private prisons are businesses, Yelp automatically generates review pages for them, right? Businesses, like if they're registered businesses, Yelp automatically generates, and Google does this too, I believe, automatically generates like business pages for them on Yelp. So my collaborator, Sam Levine, and I were like really intrigued by this. Sam and I both are prison abolitionists, but so not just private prisons, but this is like particularly disturbing, this sort of fact that prisons are for profit for the most part in the US. Like these are companies with shareholders that generate shareholder value, and their product is imprisoning humans. So we thought this was kind of disturbing and hilarious at the same time, right? This, like the fact that these prisons have these Yelp review pages. And there were actually reviews on a lot of these prisons. Some of the reviews were kind of snarky. There were jokes, like other people had found this kind of interesting or funny. So some people had said, like, for example, said things like, "Great island getaway right in my own backyard" for Rikers, just in New York City on an island. And other reviews appeared to be honest first-person accounts. Some people reviewed it as a visitor. So some people reviewed the visiting experience, and others described their experience as an inmate. So it's this really interesting terrain, this really interesting like corner of the web where people were genuinely or satirically interacting with these prison Yelp pages. So Sam and I created a simple script that scraped the Yelp pages of a large collection of prisons. And when a new review was posted, we would send, using a Python, is an API, a faxing API. We would send automatically a fax of that review to the prison's warden because the warden's fax numbers were public. I don't think this is the case anymore. I don't think they even have fax machines anymore. But even in 2015, they had fax machines. So we used these public APIs in Python and just sort of connected a couple dots, like a couple of pipes in the web. So the potential for this was already there. And obviously this is critical of prisons. But the project was sort of half prank at the expense of the prison wardens and half a genuine curiosity around how accountability and feedback could be injected into a system in these unintended ways. It sort of contained this question: how do these computational systems facilitate the incarceration of bodies, and what might we subvert those systems? And right, this project didn't like free any prisoners, right? So this is I wish it had that would be an ideal project. But this project, for me, excites me in that it shows that such a simple act, such a simple reworking of combining a couple of APIs can sort of effectively poke fun at or criticize this system that we thought was problematic. So right after school, after I graduated from ITP, I worked for a company called Final Frontier Design, which is a aerospace safety garment company and NASA contractor. And I worked on some great projects there, a bunch of projects, but one that I'll share with you is this mechanical counter pressure glove. And this is right, it's a client project, sort of in that client project category. The other ones I've showed so far are maybe more in the personal art practice category. And this glove, I worked on the hardware and the software aspects of this. So I created this sensor glove that goes inside the mechanical counter pressure glove, which is the garment we were making there on the right. And I guess its important background might be that spacesuits keep you alive, right? They're trying to sort of create these Earth-like conditions in terms of temperature and access to oxygen and pressure. And the pressure that spacesuits generally use is like air pressure. It's like a balloon. They're inflated like a balloon, and this pressure keeps your body from exploding, right? It holds your body as the same way that Earth holds your body. The Earth pressure holds your body. Mechanical counter pressure is it trying to achieve that same counter pressure, but with the garment itself. So essentially, the garment's just very tight. So instead of being inflated and the air pressure holding you in, it's the garment squeezing you in the same way that air squeezes you. The benefits from this are like increased mobility and tactility. It's less fatiguing to move around if you're repairing the spaceship, or if you're space station, or if you're sort of piloting. The idea is that you have a lot more mobility. And this is used by NASA. So this was a NASA contract, and this was delivered to NASA. Here's some engineers doing tactility tests, dexterity tests. And for this project, I used Arduino and P5.js and processing, which are tools that maybe some of you in the room have experimented with. This was entirely Arduino, and what we're looking at right here is the kind of live data readout that I created in P5.js, I believe. I had two versions. I think this was this might have been the processing version, but I was able to sort of live validate our garment. So we used this matrix of pressure sensors to validate that there weren't hot spots of pressure, and just to sort of save data for later comparison. This project is a project. This was a collaboration with Alexia Mathieu and Conan Lai at the Sight and Sound Festival in Montreal some years in 2016. And the theme of the festival was the sharing economy. So we made this, which is services like Airbnb or Uber or TaskRabbit, Fiverr. And so we made this project. This is kind of a simple defacing of websites. So we didn't go out and deface the actual websites of Airbnb, right? But yeah, as you know, like you probably know, the web happens at your computer. Like, so if you're a client, if you're a laptop, and you go and you ask a server for a website, that website, that server sends you HTML files and CSS files and JavaScript files, and then your browser renders those files locally. So you have total access to those files. Like if you right click on a browser page, like if you go to google.com or bbc.com or something, or .co.uk, you right click on that and you can view the source. In there, you can also edit the source, right? You can edit the background color to be blue if you wanted to. No one else in the world sees that, right? But you do, and your sort of personal experience of BBC's website is now the background can be blue. Highly recommend you play around with that. It's a fun thing to do. But what we did was use that fact to redesign the websites of Airbnb and Uber and TaskRabbit, and show the sort of the externalities of doing business. These kind of like maybe more hidden aspects of the business's business models. So gentrification being this image we're looking at now. This was the Airbnb website. We replaced those maybe inspiring video that they had playing in the background with a video of a house being bulldozed. We also did that with TaskRabbit and Uber. I have like the video there. Maybe we won't watch the video, but it's I think it's an interesting approach to sort of online détournement, or the sort of defacing, critically defacing billboards or something, but in an online context, in this web context. It's also sort of harmless, right? Like we made this art piece and we can show it, but we didn't actually like destroy anyone's advertising property or anything like that. Then we presented it on a browser. This was part of a hack of something called Art Hack Day. So we had like one day to make a piece, and we got together and made this. Just going to go quickly through this one. This is a project where I made a interactive kind of game experience, not quite an escape room. It's more like a game experience, immersive game experience for the movie Alita Battle Angel, the James Cameron and Robert Rodriguez movie. I worked with a company called Telart, and where we made these 3 copies of this game experience, one in Los Angeles, one in New York, and one in Austin, Texas. And we worked with the set designers. My role here was just making all the interactive elements, like these sort of game experiences that you got to play, almost like gambling experiences. So sort of this in-world immersive experience. It was for the premiere of the movie. This was a really exciting project for me in that we got to use sort of like we got to create this kind of massive network of devices locally inside the warehouses that we were working in, where we had over 100 computers talking to each other in this local network, Raspberry Pis, Arduinos. This device that you're looking at here is like essentially an Android device for scanning QR codes, and then sort of computers and tablets. And we got to create this kind of local server setup where each of these computers was a client in the network and could send data back and forth. So you came in and the user kind of arrived at this experience. You got like a QR code printed out on a badge, and then everything you did in that space was associated with that QR code with your user ID and stuff. So you like gained money and spent it and gambled it and stuff. I also created this is also with Telart. I created a project for Samsung and the Olympic Pavilion, and it was sort of this project where we made a large vitrine, this big large sculpture that expressed the manufacturing process of Samsung's Galaxy phone. So like a very straight ahead corporate client project, but it was really fun team and really fun place to be making this kind of thing. and good challenges where we had to kind of figure out how to get a robot arm, to talk to CNCs and sort of have continuity in the choreography, get all these things to speak the same language. I've got lots of other client projects that I'll skip over, but happy to ask, feel free to ask about any of these: Fila, New York Times, Bullet. This is a current project I'm working on. I can't go too much into detail because it's not out yet, but this is a kind of working on a project with a company called Lab at Rockwell Group. It's an architecture firm in New York, and we're making a large-scale sculpture for a client in DC. That will be a huge sculpture, and I've sort of designed the hardware for the hardware controllers for that sculpture. So you can see this is the circuit that I designed. Especially wanted to include it because so much of my work is hardware focused, and I didn't necessarily show that in a lot of the examples that I've been going through. Right. And this project, this is sort of what I'm currently working on. This one is not done. So this is right now I'm calling it No Nature. That's why I'm reluctant to say the name, because it's, who knows if it'll change. But right now I'm thinking this is being called No Nature. And this project is heavily focused on trying to blur this kind of line. This is a personal art project. I will be showing some of this work at a place called the Vermont Studio Center in December at a show. But this is a body of work that's made up of static prints and poems and interactive websites and video artworks. And it's the series of generative artworks that set out to blur the lines between what we might call nature and the social or human and the machinic. So it's sort of positioning them as this constituent parts of the same entangled whole, right? Like that geology and the copper and the lithium and the gold and the quartz crystals that are in a computer aren't so different than the grass that we're standing on, or the blood that's flowing in our veins. So it's like deliberately multivalent. It's exploring the material and geological realities of computation, and it attempts to hold the kind of problematic aspects of modern computation along with the magically beautiful ones. And the whole project is sort of based on this notion, which is very inspiring to me, which is that programming a computer is akin to breathing human intention into a pile of stones. And you might see this might be different in style and tone than some of the other projects you've seen, some other art projects, in that this one is kind of going for a more poetic approach. It's not an essay like some of my other projects might be described as. It's not trying to convince you of something. It's trying to make you feel something. Right? Poetry has this it's allowed to be ambiguous. Right, and I really come to relish that ambiguity that poetry allows, and I've become more interested in making work that tries to access that feeling. Here's a video version, and I've made distant processing. So my work is concerned with, maybe paradoxically, right, both complicating and elucidating my subject matter. So like a good project for me is one that takes something naturalized, something that feels inevitable or a given, and it reveals its origins and potentially its alternatives. It shows us that another world is possible. So I'm not sure like if my projects are achieving that. Like I'm not saying that, but that's certainly my motivation. That's certainly what I want out of my projects. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was great to see all the different practices that you have and how you combine them. Is there any question? You know what I think? I love that you showed the glove example, and that when you said, "Oh, I did that with processing P5 and Arduino,"
Yeah.
I was like,
For
"This is
NASA,
great,"
for a
because
NASA client.
because
Yeah.
it looked highly complicated from the
Yeah.
outside, but then when you said that, then I thought there was tools that we use here every day in media design. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, could you? I had a
it's great.
similar reaction. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that those projects are really important projects in that they're open source, right? And there's really powerful communities, really vibrant communities in all those contexts or all those cases, right? And the whole point of those communities is sort of this like educational thrust, this educational goal. And those tools are like completely valid tools in their own right. And I really do rely on all those tools in almost every one of the projects that I shared. If I've written something in JavaScript or Python, it's because I learned how to do that in processing. So some of these projects are not utilizing processing, but a lot of them are. I always start in processing if I'm working in a sort of a software sketch. I even use processing over Illustrator, which is usually a bad idea. It's usually a slower idea, but it gets me somewhere special, right? Like there's Ramsey Nasser talks about in his 2000 maybe 15 or 18 IO talk. He talks about this post-human creativity or post-human creative potential of computers. And this is pre-AI, right? So not pre-AI in the world, but pre this AI moment. So he might amend the way he's talking about it, and if he were to give that talk today. But he's talking about this sort of like exceptional potential of computers to make more than you can say like by hand, and in new ways. Right? So like I can do a bunch of math on some things, some graphics I'm trying to create that would be very difficult for me to do by hand with a ruler and a pencil, and I can do it very quickly. So I can make these sort of like endless generative systems with just a few keystrokes. And you can, Illustrator and Photoshop, you're using a computer, and I don't want to knock those because they're really wonderful tools. But that's like kind of not where computers excite me. Like the Illustrator, if you want to make a box, you can make a box much faster than writing the lines of code and processing to make a box. And so I understand its speed is important. And it's better at certain things like making a box. But if you wanted to make that box like bounce around on screen based on where my head was in space, or bounce around on screen, or to shrink and grow, or to sort of like grow in fractals or something like that, which does sound more exciting to me. It's very difficult to do that in Illustrator. With the scripting interfaces, you can, but tools like processing allow us to do that very easily and very quickly. And so I do find myself using them in my work, every time.
Great. Je sais pas s'il y a encore des questions. No?
I'm fascinated with your virtual background of trees, and no, I'm joking. It looks like a wonderful context that you're working in.
Yes.
Are you in some? I mean, are you totally out? Are you doing all this code work totally outside of an urban context?
Yes. Yeah. Good question. Lately, yes. So I'm in Vermont. This is my home in Vermont. And yep, we're out in the woods here. We're in a town of 800 people, so it's very small, and we're up on a mountainside. We got snow this morning, and it's an incredible place. But yes, it's very rural. And I was in New York for 5 years, and then in Providence, Rhode Island, for 5 years teaching at RISD. But have prioritized coming out here. We're very close to Montreal, like I said, so we do. I'm going there tomorrow, and was there last week. So we're not so far away from an urban center, but yeah, we're out here, and this is where I do a lot of the work that I do.
Great. Well, I think we are.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe one question in the project, like the personal projects you showed, what is usually your process of coming up with the idea for the project, or like what is your method?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. It's different now than it was say when I was in grad school or right after grad school, for me, collaboration is where most of my projects come from. Like chatting with a friend about something that we think is interesting is sort of the source of most of my sort of like straightforward project ideas. But a lot of it is sort of this research approach, especially now, not being an urban center, not being in school. These are more like research-based expressions where I've spent a year on Arena, like collecting some Arena collection. Are people familiar with Arena? It's hard to tell how popular
what is that?
it is. Okay, okay.
When you collect references.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I put it in the chat, but it's like this. It's kind of like Pinterest for designers, right? I'm sure there's a nicer way to describe it, but I think it's a really exciting, very simple but very exciting tool, and I use it every day for organizing my ideas. And so I do my research in Arena, and some of that's private research, but almost all of it's public research, where I've allowed those collections to be public, and so you're interacting with people are adding to your collection, you can add to each other's collections, and I use Arena to sort of frame these ambiguous, these like more abstract questions. I've got one, might be a good example, I've got a collection called Outdoor Computing Club, and this is this like line of research that I've been doing for a couple of years now, which is just like juxtaposing computers and nature. And it's related to what this project I'm working on that's a little bit more sort of beautiful and aesthetic. But that line of research is like these amazing, bizarre pictures of people like on laptops underwater, or making an arrowhead out of a circuit board, like these things that feel to us. I think our assumption is that those things are so divorced, the technological and the natural are so far from each other that they're sort of ends of a spectrum. And when you kind of put them together, it has this funny feeling for me, and that funny feeling is an ambiguous one. It's one that's very difficult to explain, and for me, the Arena does a really good job of not needing to didactically explain those things, not needing to write an essay about why those things are interesting next to each other, but just putting them next to each other and letting you have that feeling. So for me, the research-based is how most of my projects start. They come from these sort of fledgling ideas that I try to work in the research space. And then if I feel confident or comfortable with expressing them as an art piece, then I try to do that. But honestly, the research, I wish I could just show the research in a gallery, because that seems more interesting.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Fletcher, for your time today, being here with us in Geneva. And let's keep in touch, and good luck on your upcoming show then in December.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.